Have you ever wondered which professional sport has the best return on investment? I've done the research and crunched the numbers, and I've ranked 9 professional sports based on which one has the best return on investment over the lifetime of a professional athlete. So if you've got a young prodigy athlete in your family and you're wondering what their earning potential might be, or if you're just curious about how much these pro athletes spend versus how much they make, then stick around. And without any further ado, let's start with number 9. So number 9 on the list with the worst ROI of any of the professional sports that I looked at is MMA or UFC fighting. So why does this sport rank so poorly? Well, for starters, the average annual pro salary of UFC fighters is only $150,000, and the average length of a pro career is only about 1.5 years, or potentially 2 to 3 fights. Now, it's important to keep in mind that for these numbers, as well as for all of the other sports on the list, we're looking at total averages across all of the athletes in the sport. So while a fighter like Conor McGregor, for instance, might make a ton of money and have a relatively long career, on average, these people are not making that much. And so for UFC fighters, the average lifetime pro earnings is just over $200,000. In order to become a pro fighter, you have to have professional training, and leading up to a fight, there's a lot of cost that you have to incur. For instance, flying out your whole team to wherever the fight is going to be, doing all the prep work, eating right, paying for everything. And apparently all of that could cost somewhere around $75,000 per fight, meaning that if the average UFC fighter only has about 2 fights in the course of their career, then the ROI here is only 1.5 to 1. And when you add on top of that the toll that UFC fighting takes on your body and potentially your mental health, in my opinion, it's really just not worth it. Next on the list at number 8 is Formula One racing. Now this one is interesting because the average annual salary for these athletes is $10 million and the average career length is 8 to 10 years. And that number has been trending up steadily. And that means that the lifetime earnings for these pros could be in the realm of $80 to $100 million. Now we'll go with the lower figure just to have a more conservative estimate. The thing is though that it can be very, very expensive to become a professional Formula One race car driver. And that really offsets the return on investment, which is why this only comes in at number 8. There's a ton of costs involved in becoming a professional driver. First of all, they usually have to start out in karting at a very young age, and all the costs of that to build and transport these little go-karts all around the world to participate in these races cost a ton of money. And some estimates that I've seen say that it could range from $500,000 or even much, much more, depending on how dedicated you are. But that's just at a very basic level, because in order to actually become a Formula One driver, in some cases, it actually costs millions of dollars. Now, the reality is that parents or the actual athletes themselves don't necessarily have to pay out of pocket for that, although sometimes they do. For instance, in the case of Lance Stroll, whose dad is the billionaire mogul who actually bought a Formula One team and renamed it the Aston Martin team, just partially at least, so his son could have a spot. But even if your dad is not a billionaire, to secure a spot in the Formula One paddock where there's only 20 drivers at any given time, you need to bring money somehow, and in a lot of cases that comes through sponsorships. And since the lifetime cost to be a professional racer is estimated in the millions, all the way up to potentially $10 million or more, I'm gonna go with the higher figure, again in this case to be more conservative, and if we use that higher figure of $10 million, the ROI of Formula One racing comes out to about 8 to 1. Next on the list, coming in at number 7, is PGA golf. Now the average PGA golfer makes around $1.5 million per year, and according to the research that I've seen, the average length of career for a PGA player is about 4 years. That means that the overall lifetime earnings is $6 million. Now how much does it cost to become a PGA golfer? Well, apparently quite a bit. Estimates put it at around $450,000 over the life of a developing golfer. Of course, that amount could be higher or lower depending on how much money you're spending on training and personal trainers and flying around to different courses to play at different tournaments. But if we compare the lifetime earnings of $6 million to that $450,000 average figure for the cost to become a pro golfer, that works out to an ROI of 13.3, which is not bad. Moving on up, at number 6, we've got professional or ATP tennis. The average annual salary of a pro tennis player is $750,000, and that's an average of the top top 200 ranked professional tennis players. The average length of career for those players is 8 years, making the total lifetime earnings $6 million. But becoming a professional tennis player is cheaper than becoming a professional golfer, apparently, because the estimates that I've seen suggest that it could cost around $300,000 to put your kid through tennis camps and programs and develop them to a point where they can actually go pro. That means that tennis has a potential ROI of 20 to 1. Number 5 on the list is NHL hockey, where the average annual salary of a professional hockey player is $2.5 million. And with an average career length of 4.5 years, we're talking about $11.25 million over their lifetimes. Now, pinning down the average cost to become a professional hockey player was a little tricky because some parents will spend fortunes on their children, whereas others will actually end up having their kids make it to the league without actually having to mortgage their houses and spend all this money. That said, taking an average of some of the different numbers that I've seen, it's probably going to cost $260,000 to become a professional hockey player. And when you compare that to the pretty solid $11.25 million lifetime earnings, we're talking about an ROI of 43.3 to 1. Number 4 on the list is NFL football. Here we've got an average annual salary of $2 million and an average career length of 3.3 years. That works out to only about $6.6 million over the lifetime of these athletes, but it costs much less than some of the other sports on this list to actually go pro. Estimates that I've seen suggest that it's possible to make it to the NFL with a budget of around $130,000, meaning that the ROI of playing professional football is 50.8 to 1. That said, you'll frequently see NFL players making it to the league after coming from environments and families where they didn't have a lot of money to spend on training. Third on the list is MLB, Major League Baseball. And these athletes are making an average of $4.2 million per year. With an average career length of 2.7 years, we're looking at an $11.3 million lifetime earnings. And the cost to become a professional baseball player is pegged at around $130,000, meaning that this has an ROI of over 87 to 1. And really for baseball, as well as all of the other sports on the top 4, I would say that you don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars to go pro. Of course, it might help and get you access to extra training that other people don't have, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to buy your way into the league, and you'll often see players coming from situations where they didn't have a lot of money. Number 2 on the list is professional basketball, NBA basketball. These players make an average annual salary of $7.5 million over an average career length of 4.5 years. That means that we're talking about lifetime pro earnings of over $33 million. And when you compare that to the cost of becoming a professional basketball player, which is estimated at around $65,000, the ROI is huge. That's a 519 to 1 ROI. And with basketball, the average cost to become a professional athlete is relatively low because you don't really need any kind of fancy equipment. Generally speaking, you can probably play locally and you don't need to travel around the world to visit expensive places and participate in expensive events. And especially in North America, there's a pretty robust system with the high school to college to NBA progression where gifted and talented athletes are recognized at an early age and given access to free training, so the parents don't have to be paying out of pocket for a lot of this stuff. But the number 1 ROI sport on the list is actually soccer, and here I'm talking about Premier League football in the UK. The average annual salary of these players is $4.3 million over an average career of 8 years. That works out to lifetime pro earnings of over $34 million, and the average cost to become a professional soccer player in the Premier League is $65,000. So same as the average cost to become an NBA player. That means that the ROI of our number 1 sport is 529 to 1. So if you're thinking about putting your kid into a sport thinking that one day they'll go pro and then you can actually cash out and get rich, now you know which sports have the best return on investment. But of course you have to compare that to the likelihood of anybody ever actually making it, which is slim to none, and ask yourself if it's actually worth it. Because for every parent that spends hundreds of thousands of dollars for their kid to reach the NFL or the NHL or the NBA, there's going to be parents that spend that same amount of money for absolutely zero return on investment. Anyways, that's it for today's video. I hope you found this entertaining, and if you did, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I regularly post content on personal finance, investing, and also starting a business. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.